Hey, what's up guys, welcome back to the channel, and this is another running and training vlog. So the main purpose of this video is for you to tell me about your week of running. I want to hear about your successes. I definitely want to hear about your setbacks. And like every Monday when we do our running and training vlog, I'm going to tell you about my week of running at the end of the video. For now, I've come across something that's pretty exciting. Pretty exciting if you are a running data nerd. Pretty exciting if you want to get the best out of your training and you want to find out how the elites do it, right? It might not be too much of a jump to assume that perhaps you and I don't have the same training practices as elite runners. Well, in this video, I'm going to be telling you about an article that I found in Trail Runner magazine. And the article is by David Roche, and it's titled The Science Behind How Elite Runners Train. So right there in the title, we have two clear components that are going to hold you to this video. You are not going to want to click away. Those two components are science and elite runners. So basically in this video, I'm going to be giving you proof on what elite runners do and how it makes them elite. And then I'm going to draw some conclusions about this article and my own training, and I want you to do the same about your own training, okay? This is going to be fun. So this review article that the Trail Runner article that I just mentioned is based on is titled The Training Characteristics of World-Class Distance Runners, an Integration of Scientific Literature and Results Proven Practice. So we often talk about the scientific literature around running. What you don't often hear about from me is results proven practice, and this is a results proven practice that is actually the more exciting thing. So these researchers actually took the results from the training logs of elite athletes. The researchers actually had a pretty sound explanation for looking at these results proven practices by looking at the elite runners. And they say that traditionally sports scientists have looked at the why surrounding why elite runners do what they do, rather than looking at the how in the training process. So this article, by looking at a cross-section of elite athletes, both middle distance track athletes and long distance marathon runners, we actually get to see how they structure their training. And of course, it's normal to wonder why. Why do I want to know this information? Well, it's because these researchers have looked at the best in the world and they have gathered information from the best. Now we have to assume that there are some things that make these people the best that perhaps you and I cannot get to. There are definitely genetic considerations, but there's a lot of stuff that you and I can adopt in our own training practices. So these researchers looked at the training logs and information from 59 world-class leading athletes and 16 coaches of podium finishers. And they looked at distances of 5 and 10K raced on the track and also road marathons. And I think that by looking at the 5K and the 10K on the track and the full marathon, there's got to be something in the results that you are going to find useful. Okay, so let's just lay this out on the table. The researchers do point out that this is not peer reviewed. They are just taking this data from available sources. So obviously it is subject to a lot of biases. A lot of stuff is reported differently. We don't know if some of these athletes are doping in order to get them to those podium finishes. And by looking at only the best of the best, we're really limiting the scope of this review to the outliers. And then we're trying to draw conclusions from the outliers. And when I say it like that, it really doesn't make much sense to pay any attention to this. And yet I want you to suspend your disbelief, because that's exactly what we're going to do. Because I still hold that by looking at these elite athletes and their training practices, that you and I can take some of this and bring it back into our own lives. And what I think you're going to be surprised at, mainly because I was surprised at it, is that some of these training practices are the normal stuff that I talk about every week. It's the stuff that you hear all the time. Basically, I like this article because of confirmation bias, but there was just a few little things that were different, that were enough to support what I already hold about running, and then give me something else to shoot for. But let's just be clear, I am under no illusion that I am ever going to be a world-class podium finisher, but it's nice to dream. The one thing that the study authors said, which supports what I've heard before, but it's also pretty good to hear again, and it's also for you if you are a fairly new runner, and by new I mean you started running less than a couple of years ago. The authors state that it takes between 8 and 10 years prior training to reach an international standard. Now, I have been running for over 10 years, but if you haven't, then my friends, I've got to tell you, there is still hope that you could reach an international standard. So this review looks at the 5K and 10K athletes competing on the track, but I think for us, we can take these results and we can extrapolate them out to 5K and 10K on the road, because generally speaking, that's what most of us are going to be doing. And then if you run marathons on the road, this fits directly into your wheelhouse. But the structure of all the athletes' training is really going to come as no surprise. There are generally 3 aspects to it. We've got preparation, competition, and transition. Preparation is quite a catch-all. It starts at the beginning with basically nothing and slowly trying to ramp up your volume. And then at the other end of the spectrum, when we get into the competition phase, that's when I start to throw in more race-specific runs. The competition phase is a continuation of the preparation phase, except instead of training, at least the 5 and 10K runners, they've got more races and more recovery, right? It makes sense. If there's a track season, you're going to be running for quite a long period of time. You're going to be doing several races. You've already put the work in that preparation phase. Then you've got the competition phase, and it's time to take care of business. And then you've got the transition phase, phase, and the transitions phase is really just another word for your off season. It's where you take 2, 3, 4 weeks off before you start the process all over again. Then you can start your base training. Now this is a little nugget that I want you to take away if you are specializing in 5K or 10K. The elite runners of these distances did not do races longer than their specific distances. I think this is an important takeaway if you really want to reach your potential, because let's say you want to run a very fast 5K. There isn't a lot of value in going out and racing a half marathon. Now remember, I'm saying racing. I can pretty much guarantee that their long runs are going to be at least up to a half marathon distance, but they're not racing them. So keep that in mind if you want to really do well in the 5K or 10K. Now for marathon runners, it really is very similar. We have the preparation phase where we build up. As we get towards the competition phase, we start to throw in more tempo efforts, more intervals. But the key difference is that as marathon runners, we are not running as fast as those training for a 5K and 10K event. And that makes sense. We don't have to run as fast. It was also found that marathon runners have their highest weekly mileage right before they start the taper, which if you have trained for a marathon in the past, perhaps this isn't going to come as any surprise, but if you haven't, if you're thinking about maybe moving to the marathon distance in the future, it's really something to consider. Now this next part is going to sound like I'm beating a dead horse about easy runs being the majority of your training, but guys, it holds up with elite runners. It was found for the elite runners in the study that 80% or more of their training was done at easy or recovery pace. And this is for a couple of reasons. It increases mitochondrial biogenesis and makes your capillaries more dense. Capillary. And that is what leads to aerobic development over a long time frame. And you're wondering how easy should be? Well, the authors of this study, based on all their data of elite runners, says that your easy runs should be between 3 and 5 kilometers an hour slower than your marathon pace. For me, it actually worked out pretty well if I assume that I am a 3-hour marathon runner, which I'm really not sure that I am. I don't think I am, but I'm nothing if not positive. And for track runners, these elite runners are running their long runs up to 2 hours, and for the marathoners, the long run is anywhere between 1 hour and 15 minutes and 2 hours and 45 minutes. However, as someone that has run a couple of marathons, I generally don't think of my long run being 1 hour and 15 minutes. The authors say that we need to combine high intensity efforts with easy efforts. And get this, because I like the way they said it, to elicit a complex suite of overlapping and complementary adaptations. Sounds pretty good, right? Even though this is the first time I've heard about it, I know that I definitely want a complex suite of overlapping and complementary adaptations. Now, of course, there's a big difference between the 5K and the 10K athletes and the marathon runners, and the distribution of these high intensity runs are really going to differ depending on what type of athlete you are, depending on what type of event you are training for. And the authors do cite a really good training principle from Bill Bowerman and Frank Shorter that they say applies to most training. 2 to 3 weekly interval sessions, a weekly long run, and fill the rest with as much easy running as you can handle. Pretty much a recipe for success right there. These 2 to 3 weekly speed sessions included fartlek runs, threshold intervals, VO2 max intervals, and hill repeats. Okay, next up is the training volume of elite athletes, and this was something that I wanted to compare myself with just to see how far off I am. It turns out I'm quite a ways off. So it turns out that world-leading marathoners train for between 500 and 700 hours per year, with track runners at the 5K and 10K distance training between 450 and 600 miles a year. And those hours of training are spread out between 11 and 14 sessions per week. So clearly, the elites are running doubles on a very regular basis. It did make me go back and look at my training logs for the last couple of years, and I found that in 2019, I logged 334 hours of just running. In 2020, I logged 437 hours of just running. And in 2021, I logged 410 hours of just running. And if you want to let me know about how much running that you have logged in the last couple of years, I would love to hear it. Now, we know that these elite runners, they log a lot of time running, but here's where the structure of it comes in. So these athletes will start in the preparation phase by building their frequency of their runs. So they'll start throwing in doubles just to get that frequency a little higher. Then once they've established a high frequency of running, that's when they start to increase the volume. So frequency first, followed by volume. And David Roche points out that this is a terrific principle for all runners. The typical training volume for the elite runners in the marathon is between 160 and 220 kilometers per week. For track runners running the 5K and 10K, it's between 130 and 190 kilometers a week. I know that even on my biggest weeks, I don't get anywhere near 160 kilometers. Now, as far as measuring intensity goes, the authors do recognize that there is no one specific thing that actually recognizes intensity. So some of you may look at heart rate, some people might look at pace, some people might look at power, but the authors recognize that no single variable performs well in isolation. And this is because of the intensity duration interactions, individual day-to-day variations, strain responses that can carry over from previous workouts, and they recognize that a well-developed sense of feel. It's probably what matters most. And this is good for you and I. So when we go out and we are not hitting our recommended paces, we have to look at how that pace actually feels at the time. Perhaps we're going through something stressful in life. Perhaps we didn't sleep well. Perhaps we're still tired from a previous workout we did a couple days ago. All that ties into your training. But basically, it's how you're feeling that is most important, that perceived effort. But the authors do include an intensity scale to give you an idea over what certain paces, what type of workouts actually are. And they include speed, they include times. So I'm also going to include a link to this intensity table in the show notes below, just so you guys don't have to click around the article trying to find it. Another area that had some pretty fascinating results is in the area of tapering. In fact, I think the literature says somewhere between a 2 and 3 week taper is best. When the researchers looked at the results from the elite athletes, they found that they weren't actually following the guidelines that the literature would suggest. In fact, they state that most long distance runners don't actually report a substantial decrease in volume in the 7 to 10 days prior to their event. And they found that their last intense session is between 3 and 5 days before their race. So for me, I think that tapering is an art as well as a science. I think we really have to find what works best for us. And of course, there's no shortage of guidance out there. And of course, subscribe to this channel as I talk about my taper next week as I wind down towards the 2022 Boston Marathon. Well guys, I had a pretty good week of running. I would say that this is my first week of taper, so my volume is going to be coming down a bit. And I started this week off with 7 miles, very easy, just going out, turning those legs over. Now on Monday for these easy miles, I was running easy because I was still a bit heavy-legged from my long run a couple days before. But I got through it and everything seemed okay. Because on Tuesday was a workout day. Now, as you've heard many times, during the taper, we have to keep the intensity but drop the volume. So Tuesday's workout was 6 1-mile intervals. I had 2 minutes of recovery in between each interval, and that was sandwiched between a warm-up and a cool-down. Feeling pretty good. Although when I did that workout, it was 70 degrees Fahrenheit and 96% humidity, so a bit oppressive. Still, took care of business. Wednesday, I went out for 5 miles, very easy. Now, this was a fun run. Fun run because I usually run more than 5 miles, so when that's the only thing I have to do, it feels like I have a lot more time in my day. Probably because I do have a lot more time in my day. Thursday was a workout day. Now, Thursday was my final workout before the Boston Marathon. I did 11.2 miles total. I warmed up for 1 mile, did 9 miles. That was the block of work at tempo pace. Well, not really tempo pace. I did have to adjust it because of the heat. It was 76 degrees that morning, 24 degrees Celsius, but still the effort was there. And then I cooled down for 1.2 miles. Friday was my day off this week, and then I'm just rolling into the rest of the time before the Boston Marathon with easy runs with a little bit of speed sprinkled in. So on Saturday, I ran 8 miles, very easy, but I did include 10 30-second pickups. Now, some of you may call them strides, but generally I think of strides as something I do after my run. So when I'm totally done with my run, I will stop, then I will do strides. These were pickups because they were incorporated at the end of an easy run. Same style run on Sunday, except I did 7.1 miles and 6 1-minute pickups with 1 minute recovery in between, bringing my week's total to 48.47 miles, which is about 78 kilometers, and that is about a 30% drop from my high mileage the week before. And next week we'll be dropping even more. I'm looking forward to having all that time on my hands. All right guys, let me know about your week of running. What'd you get up to? Remember, successes and setbacks. Be kind, be happy, run well. See you in a couple of days.